Welcome to the Cambridge Tech Podcast, talking all things technology from the heart of the UK's tech capital. Here are your hosts, Faye Holland and James Parton.
I'm Faye.
And I'm James. So let's start with the usual. How's your week been going, Faye?
It's been busy. I've met lots of people. I met with Ajit. We talked about Cambridge Wide Open Week. They're looking to launch that later on this month. So no doubt we'll have Prashant on telling us what's happening. And remember, it's Cambridge Wide Open Week now, not just Cambridge Wide Open Day. So that's coming up. Spent a day filming with the BBC for the Cambridge Pledge. So people will remember Sarah Allen came onto the podcast and talked about the pledge last autumn. And it was really great because Lucy Young was the first one interviewed and telling her story and why, as a young entrepreneur, it's really important for her to pledge some of her future wealth. And then Marcel Garang spoke as well. And he was saying the same thing and, you know, how invested they are in looking at where their business can help to tackle inequality, you know. So it was really interesting, really nice day. And it was quite unusual for me because I was there. It's not usually me out with the BBC being a runner, but it was quite nice to do it for a bit of a change. Who else? I met with Joe Tremontin going through all of the plans for Cambridge Enterprise. So they have definitely got a full plate of activities. I met with Toby Young, so he's from Bailey Fisher, a bit of a recruitment powerhouse here, and Andy White from Adaptive Machine Patterns, who's a new emerging company, so we'll have to get them on as well. And I finished with having lunch with Amy Weatherup last week. We spoke to Amy, if you remember, in episode 96. And then in my spare time, I'm on a massive recruitment drive, so it's a great position to be in, but I kind of forgot how full on it is when you're trying to fill spaces.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, like every interview we ever do, it's always about the people, right?
Absolutely. And what about you?
We've moved on to the mentoring phase, the Trinity Bradfield Prize. So just been reaching out to all of our lovely mentors to connect them to the winners and the finalists. Shipped a lovely new welcome pack for the members of the Bradfield Centre. And I'm really just getting my inbox and to-do list to as close to zero as possible because I'm now away on jury service. So yeah, hopefully that won't get in the way of upcoming podcast episodes. But if you're doing this solo for a while, that's the reason why.
Indeed. And I did just say we should have done jury service bingo. What kind of case are you going to get? How long are you going to be in it? I mean, it could be months, it could be years.
Yeah.
No, a couple of weeks maybe.
Let's hope not. Just one small ask, actually, because I bumped into another two people this week that just were gushing in praise of the podcast. And also, interestingly, they don't actually bother reading any of the media now because they just rely on the podcast for the updates on what's going on around the city. So I noticed that we don't have enough reviews. So please do just give 2 seconds to give us a review on your podcast platform of choice, because as you well know, the way that algorithms work these days, the reviews will really help us find a bigger and wider audience.
And a really good review, right?
Oh, yeah. Only 5-star, obviously, yeah.
Super. So should we get on with the news then, seeing as that people do like to listen to that? So the big news of last week was on the back of the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Right Honourable Rachel Reeves' announcements, where Cambridge was mentioned no less than 16 times.
Did you count those?
I didn't, but the Chamber of Commerce did, so I just stole the fact from them.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, there were two major announcements in particular. One is the renewed focus on the Oxford to Cambridge arc, which has the potential to create over 100,000 highly skilled jobs, which could contribute £78 billion to GDP by 2035. So for more information on that one, head over to the Oxford Cambridge Supercluster Board LinkedIn page.
Yeah, not to be funny about it, we've got a better return than Heathrow Airport has, but, you know, just not saying any more about that. I'll move swiftly on. The second was the intention of the UK government to partner with the University of Cambridge to establish a globally significant multi-sector innovation hub in the heart of Cambridge. So again, listeners will remember this is something that Innovate Cambridge has been actively pursuing. The idea is the Innovation Hub will enable the acceleration of economic growth and will match the success of internationally renowned centres such as Paris's Station F or the Kendall Square ecosystem in Massachusetts.
Yeah, so really exciting, and we'll be sure to keep track of those stories as they develop. On to the next story. KPMG's latest Venture Pulse report shows that 480 million of VC cash was raised by the East of England companies between October and December 2024. That's a massive increase of 61% from the prior quarter, suggesting investment funds are starting to pick up. We've discussed with many investors in previous episodes about that, so that's good news, and we'll pop a link to that in the show notes.
Yeah, and I think that it was saying as well, there's a lot of life sciences, and I know certainly with 21 to watch, the amount of biotech companies this year is massive, so I can definitely see some correlation there. Still on the funding side of things, Cambridge Innovation Capital have reported record levels of interest from US investors in potential life science and deep tech opportunities in the Cambridge cluster. Again, we talked to Tony Quested about this in a prior episode, and we've seen lots of inbound inquiries just on the back of the podcast, so it's great news for our startups and scale-ups as they're looking to grow and expand.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got more positive news coming out of ARM this week. They're looking to further expand its presence at Peterhouse Technology Park in Cambridge. ARM already occupies all 6 buildings at Peterhouse Technology Park, which total something like 330,000 square feet. And they're looking to take an additional lease for the Optic, which is scheduled for completion in February.
And the final piece of news, 2 globally influential companies with strong Cambridge links have joined forces to maximise the joint potency of AI and quantum computing. So SoftBank Group Corp, which owns 90% of ARM, who we've just been talking about, and multi-unicorn Quantinuum, which has Cambridge operations, have agreed a broad-ranging partnership. By integrating quantum computing with AI, the initiative is expected to contribute to the problem solving in diverse fields such as healthcare, finance, logistics, and energy. The collaboration not only addresses unsolved challenges, but also creates new market opportunities and fosters technological innovation across society.
Okay, that's the end of the news stories for this week. Let's move on to today's episode, where we caught up with Nick New, who's the CEO of Optalysis, who won the startup competition at last year's Cambridge Tech Week.
Hi, Nick. Thanks very much for joining us on the podcast today. We'd like to start, if we can, with just finding out a bit more about you, about your background. I believe you're a Cambridge alum.
Indeed, yes. So my story is that working on the kind of foundations of the technology during PhD in Cambridge in the engineering department, photonics and sensors group, found this wondrous technology in a quite nascent early form that actually dates all the way back to the 1960s, where the principles were born. And the work in the lab back then was into liquid crystals. So these were micro displays. So imagine your phone screen, but with much, much smaller pixels that were actually being developed for such commercial applications like rear projection TVs, if you're old enough to remember those, which had these micro displays at the back of them, which were then projected out into larger screens. And in projector technology, so this was very much a displays technology that was being used in a non-display application, which is actually to move data from the electrical domain into the optical domain. And I found the excitement of the technology was such back then, this was back in 1998, that there was potential to take this out of the lab, commercialize it, and do some really cool things that could go much faster and more efficient than equivalent electronic processes with this optical process.
So, Nick, is that when Cambridge Correlators came about?
Yes. So Cambridge Correlators was born out of the Photonics and Sensors group on the back of an assessment of what technologies could be commercialized. And we formed the company on the back of the PhD work, actually backed by a chemicals company in County Durham that were involved in various projects in the lab. And that was the starting point, really, of taking the technology out of the laboratory dark rooms and then starting to place it in some really interesting application areas which could benefit from this form of optical computing.
So then what happened with Cambridge correlators and what then transpired to the start of Optalysis?
So it's an interesting learning curve coming out from a very technical background into the world of business and product development and so on. We spent many years focused on different project-based areas. So gaining funding from the sort of forerunner to Innovate UK, for example, various defence and military-based applications and projects. So funding through government circles and also in the private sector as well. And that ran under the production of various schemes and technologies through to around about 2013, when we were changing the focus away from the sort of military and security aspects and moving into more commercial industrial settings. So we formed Optalysis, taking the IP across and some of the directors. And from then we made some really good progress into developing optical processing systems in applications such as genetic sequence alignment, which led ultimately into AI and then onto what we're doing now in its form of post-quantum cryptography and fully homomorphic encryption. So it's been a really interesting journey, lots of ups and downs, lots of challenges around how we could find funding for hardware developments, which has been a challenge, not just for the UK, particularly for the north of England. So we moved the company to the north of England on the back of spinning out from Cambridge, tapping into a lot of expertise on the photonics and optics side in particular. So it's been a very interesting journey along all those years to get to where we are now.
So just jumping in there, Nick, you moved to Leeds because of the photonics expertise there. I didn't realise that there was a lot of photonics work up there.
Yeah, so we had local connections. So I come from this area as well. And I think from myself, my ambition was always to have a Silicon Valley-like company, but do it from the UK. And if I could do it from Yorkshire, I could help promote that region and actually, hopefully, provide some kind of aspirational work and principles. So that was always the ambition. The skills and the talents we have located, particularly around universities in this country, we really don't make enough of. And I think particularly in the north of England, where the photonics expertise from the likes of Leeds, York and Sheffield universities, people don't really know that much about because we don't really shout about it. So I was really keen to help promote that and show that you can actually go out and do really interesting technology developments in areas that maybe aren't always associated with that.
We're definitely going to come back and talk more about Leeds later in the conversation, Nick. But I mean, you're working in some fascinating deep tech areas. We've been lucky on the podcast that we've spoken to, a number of local Cambridge quantum companies and actually photonics as well. We spoke to Wave in a recent episode. So why don't we just move the conversation on and get a bit more into the detail of your kind of products? Because you're looking at the implications of quantum on security, which is a new field for us. So be really interested to kind of delve a little bit deeper in terms of the technology and the use cases.
Yeah, so I'll just introduce the technology a little bit first. The principles of the technology we're developing have never changed. It's taking advantage of the fact that you can form a mathematical function known as a Fourier transform using an interference-based process in light. So if you think how a hologram is formed, you shine light through a pattern and in the distance an image forms on a wall, say. Mathematically, that's equivalent to something called a Fourier transform. Fourier transforms are used as the basis of very large computer models. So traditionally, things like computational fluid dynamics, so weather forecasting type models, are all based on those same transforms. And it's a mathematical function that isn't particularly well suited to being implemented in digital electronics. In terms of the optical approach, the principle of using a grid, in the old days, a liquid crystal display to represent a matrix, an array, 2D array, can then be used to move data from the electrical domain into the optical domain, do this very large transform process that's compute intensive, but do it in light. So it's a very natural almost free process. Once you've got the information into the optical domain, you then capture the results of that transform, or indeed do more in the photonic stages that follow that. And thus you have an instant advantage over doing that same mathematical function in electronics. What's held that technology back from its inception back in the 1960s was actually the interface of how you actually get the data into the optical domain and then back out again. So in the earlier years of this development, it was using liquid crystal displays as the interface to bring the information into the optics, and CMOS sensors or photodiode arrays to get the data back out of the optical domain back into electronics. So the theme of using this optical analog function inside a digital setting has never changed with us. That's been the common theme through all the developments that we've done over the years. What's changed dramatically around about 2018 or so is that we pivoted away from free space optical systems. So optical systems in a classical sense with lenses, beam splitters, and the kind of traditional components in those that we used to mount to PCI boards of electronics to then insert into computer desktop tower cases, to now being a chip implementation where the same photonic functions generated, but on a much, much smaller scale within the silicon itself. So there's no more glass involved. It's still an interference-based process. So you're passing light, this is infrared light, through silicon, through an area that does the processing effectively, which is the equivalent to the old optical systems. And the big change mathematically from that is that rather than doing these very, very large multi-million point functions, we're now doing very, very small functions, but at much higher speeds, but lots of those functions working together on one layer of silicon. And that's where we're headed with this. And the advantage to that is that you can then place the optical function directly into the generation of past Fourier transforms or something related called number theoretic transforms, that rather than competing with digital, we're actually at the heart of the digital functions now. And what that allows you to do is then produce a system of optical components that are all working at low precision, but in a very deterministic way, but at very, very high speeds, which means that you can build up to very high resolution digital functions, which is directly applicable to this area that we are focused towards, which is fully homomorphic encryption.
So yeah, that's the FHE technology. And my understanding there is you can now pass data from point to point securely without ever needing to decrypt it, which is obviously a huge advantage.
So FHE is revolutionary in what it offers. It's a really exciting set of methods that from around about 2009 onwards have started gaining momentum in terms of how you can start applying these to different application areas. To introduce FHE is currently a set of around about 4 main methods under a larger banner of technologies known as privacy enhancing technologies, or PETs. What FHE does is it allows you to encrypt data locally and then send that data away under an encrypted form. The benefits of it beyond that is that because the structure of the data is preserved during the encryption, you can actually do processing on the encrypted data itself. Now, when you start to think about what that actually means, that gets really interesting because you can actually start to collaborate on data that is never exposed. You can run, in principle, any process you wish on the data itself. So that could be very large AI, Gen AI models in the future, say, in principle, and you can run it on encrypted data. So you're never actually exposing the data at any point. Typically, encryption is good for protecting data whilst it is in transit or it's being stored. When you need to process the data, you typically have to decrypt it first. So FHE closes off that last stage of vulnerability. The other aspect to FHE is that the maths behind these methods are very similar to those methods that NIST have released last year as the basis for next generation quantum secure cryptographic schemes. What that means is that there is no known method to map these onto a quantum computer to basically hack or break. So in cryptography space, quantum computers are seen as a massive threat for breaking the cryptographic schemes that form the basis of society today. So So you could say the internet in a way is built on these cryptographic schemes that protect our data during message exchanges, such as emails from retail transactions. Say they're all built on a number of methods that are vulnerable to quantum attack. And further to that, of course, what FHE allows, and as does other cryptographic schemes in this way, is that you can start to use untrusted networks as well. So you can start to think about how you could use sensitive data that you couldn't normally send off to the cloud for processing because of either legal, confidentiality, privacy reasons, but also security aspect, where you may not wish to send it down certain paths if there is a fear of that data going awry or being hacked into. Well, FHE protects against all that.
And am I right in understanding that you're also developing hardware as well as the kind of software side of this as well?
Absolutely. So the big challenge with FHE, and there's always a but to these things, is that once the data is encrypted, first of all, there is a large data expansion. So the size of the memory increases, but the processing of the data becomes the biggest challenge. So you're effectively adding on lots of layers of processing to each fundamental logic operation you are implementing on the data. Part of the reason for that is you have to manage the noise versus the signal. So that signal to noise ratio for the data that is being processed has to be managed with a separate circuit for each logic operation that you implement. What that means is that to build anything beyond very simple processors under FHE becomes a very big computational challenge indeed, and it is one where conventional processors are not well suited towards. The basis of the FHE workflows are all in the transform operations that the optics is very good at doing. And this is the reason why we have such an exciting proposition into FHE with our hardware development. So what we are doing is we are developing a photonic hybrid solution to taking on the big computational challenge that limits the use of FHE. And by doing that, we open up how FHE can actually become part of the fabric of the internet going forward.
So Nick, it's a great explanation. Thank you so much for giving that. I have a bit of a follow-up question actually from a recent episode that we ran with Deloitte when we were looking at predictions. And in that episode, we discussed the need for companies to start thinking about what their cybersecurity strategies were as quantum gets closer to market. So what are your thoughts on that? And what do you think are realistically the timeframes?
Absolutely. So all big companies are now focused towards how they can look to the future in terms of protecting the data that they hold and the data they deal with. This will become more and more prevalent for everyday users of such things as AI models, which is a big part of the story going forward with this as well. We have to start implementing these methods now. And this is what NIST, the International Standards Agency, last year have promoted. The way that the banks, for example, are looking at this now is that they have a number of schemes that they are putting into place over the next 5 to 10 years, say, that are bringing in post-quantum cryptography methods into what they do and how they handle data and how they use data. The recent examples of how AI, which obviously dominates computing these days, is turning into a very big security issue is around how the data used to train AI models is actually presenting a very large security issue in terms of how everybody's data is actually being used to train these models, but how it becomes part of the model itself later. So we've seen recent examples with the likes of the LLMs and Gen AI offerings actually churning out information that people have unwittingly entered into the model, which has then been used to train the model itself. So by even running queries through those models, often people don't realize they are adding the information into those models themselves, which then can then be retrieved by somebody else asking the right question on the back end to that. Now, the relevance of FHE to areas like this is that the data itself can be run through the models in an encrypted form, so the data is not exposed to the model itself. The model itself then can be encrypted under FHE, or at least parts of the model can be encrypted. You can encrypt the weights, so you can actually encrypt and protect the value that you've produced in the training of the model by encrypting the weights themselves. What this means is that you can move models themselves across borders without actually breaking GDPR type rules or legal and commercial rules and regulations, because you're never actually exposing the data or indeed the model itself. So that's highly relevant in today's world, where untrusted networks and how our data is potentially hacked into is one thing, but how our data is used as the basis of training large AI models is becoming a very relevant and precedent issue in itself. Part of the government's announcements just recently on AI, and indeed not just the UK government, but now the US government as well, where they're looking to place AI in many, many different areas for the obvious benefits that reaps, comes with that security challenge of how our data will be used within those models.
Yeah, we were going to actually talk to you, Nick, about your reaction to the government's AI paper. It seems to have been well received. It seems to have been well thought through. Obviously, the proof is in the pudding always, but yeah, give us your kind of top level thoughts on it. And sounds like probably the Leeds area is going to be lobbying to be one of these AI innovation zones.
Yeah, really exciting announcements. So I'm definitely going in the right direction. I think the obvious benefits of applying AI to a number of different industry areas and indeed societal benefits that can be reaped from bringing AI into everyday lives. People are very familiar with this already. And I think some of the examples, particularly in healthcare, for picking out one example area of how AI can add capability to analyzing medical scans, for example, an obvious area to apply this technology. Challenges around that is then how you make sure that your data, and that medical data in this example, can actually be processed using the best method. So typically you send that out to the cloud, so the cloud-based processors to use. Or maybe you are a company that has a knowledge base that you would like to use an AI model to interrogate, and you would like to use a publicly available cloud-based AI model to use, but you don't want that data going out of the company. Well, so the security of the data itself and how we use our data is a really big issue, and it will become an even bigger issue as time goes on and these AI implementations are carried through. Schemes such as FHE then become very, very relevant in terms of how our data can be protected in this sort of futurescape of AI being everywhere, but actually the kind of blood flow that runs through that is going to be the data that is used in the training and the inference of those models. So the announcement's really exciting from government level and a very good direction to be going in. We work closely with government already in terms of developing towards secure methods of how we use our data going forward. And in terms of what it means for the local region here in Leeds, but also others, there'll be huge opportunities clearly coming out of this from a technology standpoint. The way we see it is that technologies such as ours are going to be absolutely needed to allow that revolution to happen. So we have to talk about how this is an enabling technology that basically unlocks how AI can be applied. That's not to say we can't apply this to other areas before that are less challenging in terms of the amount of processing needed. So areas such as blockchain, for example, are where the early traction has really gained momentum in terms of providing the means to have encrypted blockchain. So areas using blockchain at the moment have a security risk attached to them, that the ledger of the blockchain is typically public, so you can actually access all the transactions that's happened on that ledger freely. FHE, using an encrypted blockchain process, actually allows you to encrypt the whole ledger and do the transactions in encrypted space still. So it becomes a completely secure blockchain area. And where people think of blockchain being related to things like cryptocurrency, for example, actually it goes much, much wider than that. So again, coming back to banking, there's a kind of silent revolution in banking taking place where blockchain is being brought in to actually run many of the processes within banking. And we've got schemes being examined now with the Bank of England, for example, in looking at the digital pound, for example, of whether we can have national currencies that are all based on blockchain going forward. So again, blockchain is a technology that you could argue has been slightly held back because of its sort of fundamental characteristics of being very public and decentralized. You still have that decentralized aspect to it, but all the data can be protected under schemes like this.
It's certainly a broad-reaching opportunity, isn't it? So just bringing it back to Optalysis specifically, what's your market opportunity? You know, who are your customers? How are you going to market?
Yeah, so as mentioned, the blockchain space is where we are headed first with the product offering. So we'll get to first product launch in the second half of this year. So the early blockchain providers into encrypted blockchain opportunities, such as smart contracts, for example, where we'll be selling into first. But we're also in discussions with many of the banks that I was mentioning before in terms of building out the longer term plays in the blockchain space as well. Other developmental areas, we've got interest from the government level developments into FHE-based secure computing applications. Security and defense is clearly going to be a big market for us. So the principles of applying FHE into such areas such as autonomous vehicles or devices that you wouldn't want falling into the wrong hands in terms of the information that they store on there, again, can be protected under FHE. There's a myriad of applications that FHE can benefit if we can unlock that processing speed requirement to then bring the speed of processing up to a comparable level to normal compute.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Nick. So there's also a more recent connection to Cambridge. You were last year's winners of the Scale Up Award at Cambridge Tech Week, so congratulations to that. Wondered what your kind of impressions were of Cambridge Tech Week, and if you stay close to the Cambridge Tech cluster, just what your kind of experience was going through that process, winning the award, experiencing Cambridge Tech Week.
Yeah, we still have a lot of ties to Cambridge and the university there. So it was really exciting to win the award. Clearly, the events around that very relevant, and obviously one of the key leading areas in technology and indeed deep tech technology areas within the UK. So the benefits for us, certainly publicity, always good, and the links into the investor groups around Cambridge that we know well, but the award certainly helps with those discussions. We're just in a Series B funding round at the moment, so I think the winning award like that is really great publicity for us, and really helps to embed us as part of the Cambridge community still. So although we're based in the north of England in Leeds and also in Bristol, where we have our second office, there the links to Cambridge remain strong and will continue to grow. And the potential locations that we see as the company continues to grow, then Cambridge will never be far away from us, I'm sure.
So you've got your product launch later on this year. You've got some funding in place. What else is happening? What's going to be your focus of the coming year?
Yeah, so we have big developments underway. We have, as I mentioned, the product launch, which is first focusing on the digital systems we can bring out to those blockchain opportunities, which will be followed by the photonic hybrid systems. We have a number of different areas we are developing into. As mentioned, the fundraise, so we're currently part of a Series B, £1 million fundraise, so closing that hopefully within Q1 this year as well. We're also involved in a consortium on hardware standards known as Fetch, which we started with two of the other hardware developers in this space. That's Niobium and Chain Reaction. That's really important in setting down standards for everybody to adopt for hardware accelerators in FHE and secure compute space going forward. So there's a lot of work going into that at the moment. And that's an exciting development as we kind of bring together all the aspects of what people need to be thinking of as they start to develop into the secure computing space and developing their own systems and implementations within that. We'll also be starting up a US office through the course of this year to boost the commercial presence there. On the technology side, we have a lot of development going on with the photonic hybrid technology, and we'll be bringing about the next implementations of that. So there's a lot of work going on there at the moment. Every day is very busy indeed, I have to say. It's we've lots of things in front of us. There's a lot to do in terms of educating the market as well. So we see our role as part of the FHE community to explain the benefits of what is a very complex set of methods to use. And our work on the software side is really important in that we have work going on to develop a framework. We work with a number of different companies and partners, including Google, for example, who are heavily involved in this, developing a framework and looking at how FHE can be a part of an embedded process. So what we need to to produce collectively as a community is for FHE really to disappear into the background, but to be used everywhere. At the moment, it's still very complex. So you need to be an expert cryptographer really to build out circuits and models under FHE right now. And that needs to change. And a lot of work is going into building out the interfaces of how you can get hold of FHE as a programmer and then build up processes such as AI models, for example, going forward with this. So lots for us to do within Optalysis, lots for us to do as part of that community. Lots going on from national and international regulatory bodies as well, as they look at how they can advise on how companies should be using and thinking about using secure compute methods in FHE. So the potential for the technology is truly revolutionary. And what we see for Optalysis is that really what NVIDIA did with GPUs, which has led into this world of AI and applying those GPUs to run AI models efficiently. We see a similar future in terms of building out this technology for what will be a very secure future, but a very exciting future with AI running through the whole of society going forward, but actually only made possible because you can secure the data and protect the data going through those models going forward.
So we promised at the top of the conversation to come back to talk about the Leeds ecosystem. We've been lucky to speak to Stuart Clark a couple of times on the podcast, you may or may not know, in Leeds. But give us a sense of what's happening in Leeds, the vibrancy of the cluster, the kind of skills and talent pool around the area. What's it like running your business from the Leeds ecosystem?
So Leeds has transformed over the past 25 years or so. Obviously, it's a big financial base these days. So a lot of fintech type companies located around here on the banks also. On the technology side, we've also seen a lot of developments. So one of our key investors, Northern Gritstone, who promote and fund startups from northern universities, Manchester, Leeds, Sheffield, in particular, really making a huge difference in terms of presenting opportunities for entrepreneurs coming out of universities with great ideas to actually get funded now, which is that there's been a challenge for many, many years. So really exciting place to be. It's got a real buzz about Leeds these days. And the work from the universities is really key to that. I mentioned before that part of the reason that we've located here is actually to access the photonic skills and resources. So we have very close links to Leeds University. We have graduates that we've brought in from Leeds as well. And it's a really up and coming place from a technology perspective. We've seen some big deals happening not far from here with Pragmatic and so on. We've got the potential to turn Leeds into a real tech centre going forward. We're really keen to promote that and the adjoining areas as well, which as we move the idea of what cities in the north of England were like in a traditional sense and based on very traditional industries, the change is happening at a pace now, which is really nice to see.
Yeah, it's very exciting. But thanks very much for being with us today, Nick, and sharing your updates. And I like something you just mentioned earlier on. I think we'll be watching for Optalysis being the NVIDIA for FHE. That's a great target to have.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed.
Today's show was produced by Carl Homer of Cambridge TV and supported by our media partner, Business Weekly. The Cambridge Tech Podcast is available on all major podcast platforms and on cambridgetechpodcast.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please give it a 5-star review. It'll really help others discover the show.